Vanity Fair, I live an extravagant life, and I make no apologies for it. I'm free as a motherfucker.
Today, we celebrate a life that changed the rhythm of a generation. A man whose heartbeat became the sound of ambition, whose dreams reshaped the meaning of success. Happy birthday, Sean Diddy Combs. Today, the world remembers not only what you built, but how you built it. Through fire, through loss, through faith that refused to die. Your name stands for something far beyond music. It stands for movement. It stands for the dream that never sleeps. Every empire begins as a whisper. Before the world called him Diddy, before the music, the parties, the headlines, there was just a boy who refused to stop dreaming. Sean Combs was not born into power. He was born into a city that demanded you fight for every breath, a world where noise drowned out hope unless you made the world listen. And he did. He once said, "Can't stop, won't stop." To most, it was just a slogan. To him, it was scripture, a survival code written in sweat and rhythm. The heartbeat of a kid from Harlem who believed that dreams were not luxury, they were oxygen. He learned early that nobody hands you greatness. You take it, inch by inch, even when your hands are bleeding. When other kids were learning how to hide from life, Sean was learning how to chase it. Every closed door was an invitation to build his own. Every rejection, another spark. Because the boy didn't just want success. He wanted transformation. He wanted to turn the noise of the streets into the sound of destiny. He watched his mother work 3 jobs, saw exhaustion living on her face, and promised himself that her pain would not be in vain. He promised that one day she would rest in the empire he built with his own hands. That promise became the first rhythm of his life, a rhythm louder than fear, stronger than failure, and endless like the beat of hip-hop itself. People remember the cars, the fame, the luxury. But before the suits and champagne, there was hunger. Not the kind you feel in your stomach, but the kind that eats at your soul until you create something to silence it. That hunger built a man. That man built a legacy. Sean Combs' story isn't about wealth or fame. It's about persistence. It's the story of a boy who lost his father to violence and instead of collapsing, turned grief into guidance. The pain that could have broken him became the engine that moved him. Every step forward was a conversation with the ghosts that tried to hold him back. He once stood on a Harlem rooftop, looking out over a city that didn't know his name, and whispered, "One day, they'll hear me." Years later, the whole world did. The name Puff Daddy was born from that moment, a nickname, a rhythm, an alter ego that could survive anything. It wasn't arrogance, it was armor. It was the version of Sean Combs that refused to disappear when life tried to erase him. He became the sound of ambition in the 1990s, a decade hungry for voices that refused to apologize. But beneath the lights, beneath the swagger and silk, there was still that boy, the one who missed his father, who worried for his mother, who feared the silence after success. Can't stop, won't stop. It wasn't just about movement. It was about survival. Stopping meant remembering. Remembering meant pain. And so he kept moving, until movement itself became his identity. Today, as another birthday rises in his story, the world celebrates the mogul, the legend, the icon. But here, we celebrate the man, the dreamer who refused to sleep, the boy who turned Harlem's noise into music, and pain into purpose. Because some people are born to dream. Sean Combs was born to build his.
Every empire begins with a loss, and every dream begins with a wound that refuses to close. For Sean John Combs, the first wound came before he could understand what pain meant. When he was only 2 years old, his father, Melvin Combs, was taken from him, murdered on the streets of Harlem. A man gone too soon, a son too young to remember his voice. But somehow, even in absence, the father became the foundation. His death carved a space in Sean that nothing else could fill, a silence that demanded sound. And maybe that's why he would later dedicate his life to rhythm, because silence had hurt too much. He was raised by his mother, Janice, a woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof above their heads. She wasn't soft, but she was strong, the kind of strength that doesn't shout. Her love was structure, her discipline a promise. You can be anything, but you can't give up, she'd say. In their small apartment, dreams were not decorations, they were blueprints, and Sean studied them like scripture. He learned that love doesn't always come in comfort. Sometimes it comes in resilience. Harlem, in the late 1970s, was loud. Loud with sirens, with laughter, with survival. But it was also a classroom. The streets taught him how to read people, how to move quick, how to dream big when nobody was watching. He became a student of energy, a watcher of movement, a listener of rhythm. Even then, he had an instinct. If he couldn't control his world, he would create one. He was a child who dressed sharp, not out of vanity, but out of defiance. The world saw poverty. He saw potential. He didn't want to blend in. He wanted to stand for something. He once said, "If you want respect, you gotta look like respect." That attitude didn't come from arrogance. It came from a boy who had seen too much to play small. Every morning, he'd tell himself, "I'm gonna make it. I don't know how yet, but I will." When he wasn't helping his mother, he was hustling, selling newspapers, running errands, shining shoes, anything to learn, anything to move forward. He didn't know it then, but he was already building the mindset that would define his life. A hustler's discipline, a leader's vision, a survivor's patience. At 12 years old, he began playing football. He wasn't the biggest, but he was relentless. Every game was a metaphor for his life. Get hit, get up, keep running. And that became his code. Football gave him focus. It gave him teamwork. And for a boy without a father, it gave him discipline from pain. But more than that, it taught him that you can't win if you don't move. When he entered Howard University years later, he carried Harlem with him, not as a burden, but as a badge. He was no longer the quiet dreamer. He was a visionary in motion. Even as a student, his ambition was too big for walls. He wasn't just studying business, he was studying people. Watching, analyzing, connecting. He understood something most didn't. Talent was nothing without opportunity, and opportunity rarely knocks. So he built his own door. He interned at Uptown Records. At first, he was just a shadow, fetching coffee, organizing tapes, doing what others refused. But he did it with precision, with hunger, with purpose. Because he knew that one day someone would notice the energy in the room had changed, and it would be him. And they did. In time, his energy was impossible to ignore. He didn't wait for chances, he created them. He turned rooms into classrooms, offices into laboratories. He was learning how to turn sound into success. The young intern started shaping the sound of Uptown Records, mentoring artists, developing music that felt alive. He saw potential where others saw chaos. He saw culture where others saw noise. And the word started to spread. There's this kid, Puff, and he's different. He hears something we don't. But behind the growing confidence, he was still carrying that boy from Harlem, the one who had lost his father, the one who couldn't afford to fail. Every late night in the studio, every argument over a sound, a beat, a lyric, it wasn't about ego. It was about survival. It was about proving to himself that pain could produce beauty. When people called him ambitious, they didn't know what ambition cost him. They didn't see the loneliness behind the late nights, the exhaustion hidden behind perfection. They didn't hear the voice in his head that said, "You don't get to quit. You can't stop now." That's the thing about dreamers. They don't rest, because rest feels too close to defeat. And for Sean, defeat wasn't an option. He once told a friend at Howard, "I'm going to run this whole city one day." They laughed. He didn't. Because he wasn't joking. He was prophesying. Every empire starts as a whisper. His had already begun. The young man from Harlem had become a student of sound, a disciple of movement, and a believer in what others called impossible. But destiny, as it always does, was already preparing its next test, one that would turn the dreamer into a force of nature. Because success doesn't arrive gently. It arrives like a storm.
Every story has a moment when motion becomes momentum. For Sean Combs, that moment began in the chaos of Uptown Records, where talent met rebellion and ambition demanded attention. He was young, relentless, and fearless. The kid from Harlem had learned how to move through rooms filled with power and somehow make them feel his presence before he even spoke. He didn't beg to be noticed. He commanded notice. And soon everyone knew it. There was something magnetic, unstoppable about the young man they called Puff. By his early 20s, Sean was shaping the sound of a new generation. He helped craft artists like Mary J. Blige and Joe Dacey, voices that carried pain, hope, and truth through rhythm. He saw music not as entertainment, but as expression, a mirror for those who grew up with nothing but dreams and noise. He once said, "I didn't invent hustle. I just gave it a soundtrack." And that's exactly what he did. He wasn't chasing fame. He was building culture. But ambition always tests loyalty. The same fire that made him indispensable soon made him too powerful to contain. His energy clashed with the system. His hunger clashed with hierarchy. And like all dreamers who outgrow their environment, Sean Combs was told to slow down. But slowing down was never in his DNA. When Uptown Records let him go in 1993, many thought it was the end. He knew it was the beginning. He walked out of that office, jobless, uncertain, but free. Free to build something that had never existed before. Something that would carry not just his name, but his philosophy. Bad Boy. It was more than a record label. It was a declaration, a generation's manifesto that said, we're not supposed to be here, and yet, here we are. Sean Combs didn't build Bad Boy Records out of arrogance. He built it out of faith. Faith in his people, faith in his vision, and faith that pain could become an empire. In 1994, the world heard the first roar of that empire. A young rapper from Brooklyn, Christopher Wallace, known to the streets as the Notorious B.I.G. Sean saw in Biggie where others missed. Truth. A poet in the language of struggle. Together, they created a sound that didn't just fill clubs, it filled hearts. Raw, real, and unapologetic. Bad Boy wasn't just producing records, it was producing hope. It was giving a generation permission to dream louder. As Big Papa and Juicy climbed the charts, Sean became more than a producer. He became a symbol. The man in the bright suits, the confident smile, the energy that turned any room into possibility. He lived big, he dreamed bigger, and he refused to apologize for either. Every camera flash became a reflection of his drive. Every headline proof that he was changing what it meant to be young, black, and powerful in America. But power is never peaceful, and fame, as he would soon learn, is a double-edged crown. The rise of Bad Boy Records was meteoric, and so was the pressure. He was managing artists, touring the world, running a label, and building a fashion line, all at once. The world saw success. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the fights, the phone calls, the fear of losing everything he built. Because the higher you climb, the stronger the wind. There were moments when he'd stand backstage, crowds chanting his name, lights blinding his eyes, and yet inside, he felt the same emptiness he had as a boy in Harlem. That's the curse of the dreamer. No matter how far you go, you can still feel the distance between who you are and who you're trying to become. But Sean refused to fall. He turned exhaustion into drive and fear into fuel. When he created the hit, "Can Nobody Hold Me Down," it wasn't just a song. It was a sermon, a statement to every person who doubted him, every gatekeeper who tried to silence him, every voice that told him he was too young, too loud, too bold. He once said, "I'm living proof that if you believe hard enough, the universe starts believing with you." And by the late 1990s, the universe seemed to agree. Bad Boy Records had become an empire. Hit after hit, artist after artist, Mace, 11-2, Faith Evans, each one carrying that unmistakable Diddy imprint, energy, elegance, emotion. He wasn't chasing success, he was defining it. For hip-hop, for fashion, for business, for culture. He didn't just walk through doors, he built new ones and left them open for others to follow. Harlem's dreamer had become hip-hop's architect. But even architects live in fragile towers. And the higher he built, the more he risked losing sight of the ground that made him. Behind the lights and parties, behind the laughter and luxury, was still that child, the boy who missed his father, who longed for peace. And peace for people like him is the hardest empire to build. Still, Sean Combs kept moving. He refused to slow down, because for him, stillness wasn't safety. It was danger. Stillness meant remembering. Remembering meant pain. So he built, and built, and built, until the world could no longer separate the man from the myth. He had achieved everything he once whispered to the stars. And yet, destiny was not done with him. Because the universe never lets greatness rise without testing its foundation. And for Sean Puffy Daddy Combs, the storm was coming. It would take everything he had, his fame, his friendships, his sense of peace, and force him to face what even he had tried to outrun, himself.
Fame is a mirror. It shows you everything the world loves about you and everything you wish you could hide. For Sean Combs, the mirror began to crack. The empire he built was unshakable on the outside, but inside, the foundation trembled. When you live too fast, you stop hearing your own heartbeat. And somewhere between the music, the parties, and the headlines, he began to lose the rhythm of himself. The world saw the suits, the lights, the luxury. They saw the laughter, the champagne, the unstoppable energy. But behind every flash, there was fatigue. Behind every smile, a weight he couldn't name. The higher he climbed, the smaller his world became. Because the air at the top is thin, and it gets harder to breathe. Then came tragedy. a moment that would break the rhythm of an entire generation. March 9th, 1997. The notorious B.I.G., his friend, his brother, his artist, was gone. Murdered in Los Angeles. A voice silenced, a dream undone. For Sean, it wasn't just the loss of an artist. It was the loss of family, the loss of a part of himself. He had built Bad Boy Records around loyalty and love. Now he stood in silence, surrounded by cameras, trying to comfort a world that had lost its hero while hiding his own grief behind sunglasses. He said later, "When Big died, a piece of me died too." In that moment, the boy who had already lost his father lost another. The pain was familiar, the silence unbearable. But Diddy had always known only one way to deal with pain: to move, to build, to keep going. Because stopping meant collapsing. So he turned grief into motion. He turned loss into legacy. "I'll Be Missing You," a song, a tribute, a prayer. He poured his heart into that record, every note a memory, every lyric a tear he couldn't cry in public. It wasn't just a hit, it was healing. For him, for the fans, for the culture. The song went around the world, becoming an anthem for grief, a reminder that love, even in loss, can echo forever. But when the applause faded, the silence returned. And this time, it stayed. Fame doesn't let you grieve. It demands performance. It doesn't care about your pain, only your presence. So Sean kept showing up. Interviews, award shows, photo shoots. He smiled, performed, created, but inside, he was unraveling. He started asking himself questions he'd never had time to ask. Who am I without success? Who am I when the lights go out? Who am I if I stop moving? And there were no easy answers. Rumors followed him. Lawsuits, drama, accusations, the price of being at the top. Every headline became a trial. Every mistake a scar that the world wanted to see. He once said, "I thought success would make me free, but it just built a bigger cage." He was trapped in the very empire he'd built, a castle with no silence, a crown that grew heavier each year. And yet, he kept going, because that's what survivors do. They keep breathing even when it hurts. They keep moving even when the ground cracks beneath them. But even the strongest engines need fuel, and his was running on fumes. The world wanted Puff Daddy, but Sean Combs, the man behind the name, was slowly fading away. In private, he began searching for something deeper, something beyond the fame, the fortune, the noise. He turned to prayer, to meditation, to silence, the very thing he once feared. He began to see that the chaos wasn't around him, it was within him, and no record, no success, no applause could drown it out. He started to question the empire itself. Was he building something that healed him, or something that hid him? Was he leading, or just running faster than his fear? He said once quietly, "Sometimes I look at everything I've built, and I still feel like that kid on the Harlem rooftop, just trying to be heard." That was the truth. Fame had amplified his voice, but it hadn't quieted his soul. The late 1990s and early 2000s became a blur. Hits, tours, parties, headlines. He lived 10 lives in one decade. But through it all, the ghosts stayed. The boy who lost his father. The man who lost his brother. The leader who couldn't rest. He was haunted not by failure, but by success. The kind that makes you wonder what you gave up to win. Then came the turning point, a near-death experience on a private flight. A moment when the noise stopped and silence returned, louder than ever before. He said later, "When you face death, you stop pretending you have forever." That moment didn't break him. It woke him up. He realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. He didn't want to just live, he wanted to be alive. And so the rebuilding began. Not of music, but of meaning. He started making changes. He looked at his circle, his habits, his choices. He stripped away the illusions and started searching for what was real. He was done performing for the world. Now he needed to perform for his soul. They say every great man must fall before he truly stands. Sean Combs was learning that lesson in real time. The empire would survive. The fame would remain. But something inside him had shifted. Something had broken open. A door to something pure. And through that door, he would find redemption.
Sometimes the hardest thing in life is to stop running. After years of chaos, of headlines, of heartbreak, Sean Combs woke up one morning and realized the noise wasn't outside anymore, it was inside him. For the first time in decades, he didn't reach for his phone, didn't rush to the studio, didn't fill the silence with sound. He just sat and breathed. And for a man who'd spent his life moving, that stillness felt like revolution. He once said, "You can't heal what you won't face." That became his truth, and facing it meant unlearning everything he thought success was. Because success had built him, but it had also blinded him. It had filled the world with noise, but emptied his heart of meaning. Now he wanted something quieter, something real. He began with gratitude. Every morning he'd write down 3 things: his children, his mother, his breath. Simple things, sacred things. It wasn't about the empire anymore. It was about energy, the kind that can't be bought, only built from within. He was no longer trying to prove anything. He was learning how to be. And in that stillness, he rediscovered his greatest role, not as a mogul, not as a star, but as a father. He poured his energy into his children, teaching them not how to chase the world, but how to listen to it, how to find peace in their own rhythm. He told them, "Don't be afraid to feel everything. Even pain can teach you how to love deeper." For a man once defined by motion, parenthood gave him gravity. It was no longer about the spotlight. It was about presence. It was about legacy, not as a brand, but as a heartbeat that lives through others. He began to understand that being strong doesn't mean never breaking. It means learning how to rebuild with softness. Then came reflection. Sean started to look back at the man the world had known, Puff Daddy, Diddy, the icon of confidence, and realized that version of himself was just armor. He had worn it for so long, he had forgotten who he was underneath. And now, he was ready to take it off. He said, "I used to think being powerful meant being untouchable, but the real power is being honest." And with that honesty came peace. He began meditating, journaling, praying. He surrounded himself with people who grounded him, not those who praised him. He simplified his life. Luxury had once been a language, now simplicity became his dialect. He started saying no more often. No to distractions, no to people who drained his light, no to the idea that he had to be everywhere to still be somebody. For a man who built an empire on movement, stillness became the most radical act of all. He began to give back, not just money, but time, mentorship, wisdom. He started the Sean Combs Foundation, helping inner-city youth find paths he once had to carve alone. He visited schools, sat with students, listened to their stories. He wasn't there as a celebrity. He was there as a mirror, proof that your beginning doesn't define your ending. He told them, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up." As he rebuilt his relationship with himself, he also rebuilt his relationship with God. He had always believed in faith,
But now, it wasn't just a prayer before success, it was a conversation within struggle. He realized that faith wasn't about asking for blessings. It was about learning how to see them in the middle of the storm. That shift changed everything. With that clarity came forgiveness. Forgiveness for those who'd hurt him. Forgiveness for those who'd left. But most importantly, forgiveness for himself. He had carried guilt like a shadow, the loss of Biggie, the mistakes, the weight of expectations. But guilt is heavy and peace is light, and to move forward, you must let go of what anchors you to pain. So he did, piece by piece, moment by moment, breath by breath. He began to smile again, not the public smile, but the quiet one that comes when a man finally forgives the boy inside him. He once said, "For the first time in my life, I don't want to be anyone else." And that was the real turning point. Not a moment of fame or fortune, but a moment of acceptance. From that place of peace, the creativity returned. But it was different now. Softer, wiser, less about proving, more about giving. He began producing again, creating projects that spoke to truth, not just trends. Collaborations that uplifted, not just entertained. His art had always been loud. Now it was luminous. He told interviewers, "I don't chase dreams anymore. I live inside them." And that became the essence of his rebirth. Not about reaching higher, but about living deeper. He no longer wanted to dominate the world. He wanted to belong to it. By the time the world began to notice the change, he had already been reborn. The old Diddy, the restless, sleepless, ambitious warrior, was still there, but quieter now, more measured, more mindful. He had finally learned that the goal was never just success, it was significance. And significance isn't found on stage. It's found in silence, in children's laughter, in gratitude at sunrise, in the peace that follows forgiveness. For the man who lived to move the world, his greatest achievement was learning to stand still and simply exist within it.
Every fall has its purpose. Every silence carries a lesson. And sometimes the very moment you think life is ending is the moment it begins again. For Sean Combs, rebirth wasn't an announcement. It was a quiet decision to choose peace over perfection, purpose over pressure, truth over performance. He had lived as Puff Daddy. He had built empires as Diddy, but now he began to live as Sean, the man behind every name. He once said, "The hardest thing I ever did wasn't becoming successful, it was learning to live after success." That was the essence of his rebirth. Because fame can make you visible to the world and invisible to yourself. But now, he wanted to see clearly, to look in the mirror and recognize not the mogul, but the man. He began creating again, but this time from love, not fear. Music flowed differently now, less calculated, more connected. He wasn't chasing charts. He was chasing meaning. His projects reflected evolution, albums that explored spirituality, songs that celebrated gratitude, moments that honored growth. He had finally turned his pain into poetry. And while the world celebrated his comeback, Sean wasn't chasing comebacks anymore. He was chasing continuity, the rhythm of a life fully lived. He expanded into business, film, fashion, philanthropy, but this time, each move had intention. It wasn't about domination, it was about direction. He wanted every venture to reflect one truth, that success without soul is just noise. The man who once built walls of protection now built bridges of connection.
He started mentoring young artists, teaching them not just how to make hits, but how to survive them, how to hold on to themselves when the world begins to love the version of them that isn't real. He became a father figure to a new generation of dreamers, reminding them that authenticity is a superpower, and vulnerability is not weakness, but wisdom. In interviews, he began to speak differently. The words were slower, softer, less about me, more about we. He talked about legacy, not in terms of buildings or brands, but in impact. He wanted his legacy to be a generation that dreamed louder, lived kinder, and healed faster than he did. He said, "You can build all the empires you want, but if you don't build people, you've built nothing." That line became his compass. His family became the center of his world again. He showed up, not as the famous producer, but as the father who danced with his daughters, who prayed with his sons, who taught them that love is the only empire that never falls. He'd say, "You can't be a king if you don't know how to love your kingdom." And he meant it, because love, after all, was the only power that had ever outlasted pain. And so, his achievements began to change shape. The world saw awards, albums, companies, but his greatest achievement wasn't any of those. It was learning how to stay grounded in a life that once threatened to lift him away from himself. He'd found balance, a state of motion without chaos, of ambition without exhaustion, of success without sacrifice. He didn't need to be the loudest anymore. He was content being clear. When people asked him what kept him going, he smiled and said, "The same thing that started me, love. Love for life, love for people, love for God." Love had turned the hustler into a healer, the fighter into a father, the mogul into a man. His businesses thrived again, from music to fashion to spirits to philanthropy. But now, each brand carried his new signature, mindfulness. He no longer worked for success. He worked for meaning. Every new project, every new song was an extension of his reborn self, grounded, grateful, and giving. He began to speak about loss differently too. The pain of losing Biggie never left him, but he no longer saw it as a wound, he saw it as a bridge. He said, "I carry him with me. Every time I create, every time I give, he's there." Grief, he learned, doesn't disappear. It transforms. And sometimes it becomes your greatest teacher. As the years passed, Sean began to embody something the world rarely celebrates: peace. Not the kind that comes from retreating, but the kind that comes from reconciling. He had faced the ghosts. He had faced the guilt. And now he lived freely. Not perfectly, but honestly. That honesty became his final act of rebellion. He said once, "My life isn't about proving I can't fall. It's about showing I can rise again. Every time." That was the message he carried to the world, to the dreamers, the hustlers, the broken, the hopeful, that no matter how deep the fall, the comeback is always possible. And when he looked at his reflection now, he didn't see Puff Daddy or Diddy or the CEO or the icon. He saw Sean, the boy from Harlem, the son who lost his father, the man who found himself. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. He didn't need to be everything anymore. He just needed to be present. And in that presence, he finally understood that the purpose of success is not to be remembered,
but to inspire others to begin. Because true greatness isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the most authentic. And authenticity, that's the rhythm that never fades.
Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. The storms fade, the noise quiets, and all that remains are the lessons that built you. Sean Combs once lived life at the speed of sound, chasing, building, conquering, surviving. But now he walks slower. He listens more. He understands that peace was never at the top of the mountain. It was waiting for him at the bottom, inside himself. He said once, "I spent years chasing success. Now I chase sunsets." That's the sound of wisdom, a voice that has stopped performing for the world and started listening to its own rhythm again. The boy from Harlem finally became the man he needed. Not perfect, not untouchable, but real. He sits now in the quiet of reflection, a man surrounded by love, by family, by legacy. He doesn't count his awards anymore, he counts his moments. He doesn't measure his worth by charts or headlines, but by laughter in his home and gratitude in his mornings. When asked what success means now, he smiles and says, "Peace. That's it. That's all I ever wanted." Peace, the one thing he couldn't buy, couldn't chase, could only become. He looks back at the journey, the boy who lost his father, the young man who fought the world, the mogul who built an empire from pain, the dreamer who refused to sleep, and now the teacher who tells others that dreams are not meant to be owned, they're meant to be lived through love. He tells young artists, you don't have to be a star, you just have to be true. Because truth lasts longer than fame. Truth outlives charts and trends and headlines. Truth is the one rhythm time can never silence. His legacy is everywhere now, in the sound of hip-hop, in the style of culture, in the language of ambition. He didn't just create music, he created a mindset. He gave a generation permission to dream louder than their circumstances. And for that, his name will always echo, not as a brand, but as a belief. He used to say, "Can't stop, won't stop." It began as a mantra for motion. Now it's a meditation for meaning. It no longer means run harder, it means love deeper. It means keep evolving. Because life never stops teaching, and he never stopped learning. There were times when he feared the silence. Now he finds God inside it. There were times when fame felt like a crown. Now it feels like a calling, a responsibility to give, to guide, to grow. He understands that his purpose was never to live forever through fame, but to live fully through truth. And when his children ask him about legacy, he tells them gently, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live every day while you're still here. That's how he lives now, not as an icon frozen in time, but as a man who wakes up, breathes gratitude, and still believes in the magic of the morning. He once dreamed of building an empire. He did, but now he's building something greater. A generation of believers, of creators, of healers. Because the true measure of greatness is not how high you climb, but how many you lift along the way. And Sean Combs has lifted millions through words, through rhythm, through example. Now every birthday carries a softer meaning, not the flash of champagne, but the whisper of time. Another chance to thank the journey, to honor the pain, to love the story exactly as it was written. He says, every scar I have, it's proof that I lived. And every mistake,
It's proof that I learned. That's not regret. That's grace. So on this day, as candles glow and the years gather gently behind him, we don't just celebrate a name or a legend or a brand. We celebrate a soul that refused to break. A man who turned grief into rhythm, fear into faith, and ambition into art. We celebrate the dreamer who taught the world that it's never too late to start again. Happy birthday, Sean Diddy Combs. You showed us that pain can be purpose, that struggle can be sound, and that love is the rhythm that never dies. Your story is not a lesson in fame, it's a testament to faith, a melody that began in Harlem and found its harmony in peace. You dreamed too loud for the world to ignore, and we are still listening.